The alien princess asked why I feared her. My answer silenced everyone in the throne room. The throne room was a place of power. High ceilings that seemed to stretch into infinity, walls lined with intricate alien symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of authority that made the walls themselves seem alive, watching, judging. The floors were made of a smooth, black stone that reflected the figures of those who stood upon it. At the far end of the room, on an elevated dais, sat the alien princess. Her name was Azira. Though she was young, her presence was undeniable. Her skin shimmered with a strange iridescence, and her eyes, deep pools of silver, seemed to look through everything. She didn't need to speak to command attention. It was as if her very existence bent the world around her, forcing all who entered her space to feel the weight of her gaze. Standing before her, in the center of the room, was a human, a soldier from Earth. His name was Thomas, though his name no longer mattered in this place. What mattered was that he was human, and that he was in the presence of a being who had the power to destroy entire worlds with a mere thought. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The soldier's heart beat faster with every second that passed, and though he stood tall, there was an undeniable tension in his shoulders. Fear? No, it wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else, something that no human could explain to an alien. Something deep and primal, rooted in the very essence of what it meant to be human. Azira, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, almost melodic, but beneath it was an edge of sharpness, as though every word she spoke carried the weight of her authority. "Why do you fear me?" she asked, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. Thomas felt the question deep within him, as though it had struck something buried in his chest. It wasn't the kind of question you could simply answer with words. There was more to it, more that he had never been able to put into language, but now, in this moment, it seemed as though the princess was demanding that he do just that. He didn't want to look weak, didn't want to show any sign of vulnerability. After all, he had seen what these aliens could do. He had watched as entire cities were wiped out by their ships. He had seen his comrades fall in battle, their bodies vaporized by the energy weapons the aliens wielded. They weren't just soldiers, they were gods. And they showed no mercy. But it wasn't just their power that made him uneasy. It was their unpredictability. The way they looked at humanity, not with hatred, but with indifference, as though humans were little more than insects, to be studied or crushed when it suited them. Azira herself was an enigma. She had come to Earth's aid once, saving thousands of lives during a brutal war, but he had never fully understood why. Was it because she saw some value in humanity, or was it simply because we were the nearest species to her own ambitions? Thomas tried to steady his breath as he gazed at the princess. He wanted to respond, to tell her why, but the words wouldn't come. He had always been a man of action, a soldier who let his deeds speak for him. But now, standing before this alien being, this princess who wielded power beyond his comprehension, he felt small. Not insignificant, but small in the way a single raindrop might feel when it falls into an ocean. His entire life, his humanity, everything he had ever fought for felt like it could vanish in an instant. Azira's eyes never left him. Her gaze was unblinking, unyielding. She was patient, waiting for him to find the answer. She didn't seem to mind his hesitation, or perhaps she was too sure of herself to care. Her curiosity was clear. She wanted to know why he trembled in her presence, why a human, a creature so weak, so fragile, would feel fear at all. "Tell me, human," she said, her voice almost a whisper now, though it carried across the room with the same commanding force. "Why do you fear me?" The silence seemed to stretch again, longer this time. Thomas felt his pulse racing. He had never been so conscious of the blood rushing in his veins, of the rise and fall of his chest with each breath. He had fought in wars, faced down creatures that would make any human shake with terror. Yet here, in the heart of this alien empire, in the presence of this princess, he could not find the words. He thought of the years of war, the battles humanity had fought for survival. He thought of the faces of the soldiers who had fought beside him, many of them gone now. He thought of his family, his friends, everything he had left behind. All of it seemed so fragile now, as if the princess could simply wave her hand and erase it all. And then a thought hit him. A thought so simple, yet so profound, that it made everything inside him settle. The answer wasn't about power, it wasn't about strength, it wasn't even about the alien princess herself. It was something that ran deeper than that. He straightened, his shoulders back, and lifted his chin. Azira watched him with those unblinking silver eyes, her face a mask of curiosity and something else, perhaps amusement. But he could see a flicker of something else in her gaze now. Was it anticipation? "I fear you," Thomas began, his voice steady, "because you don't understand what it means to be human." Azira's expression remained unchanged, but there was a slight narrowing of her eyes. She leaned forward, intrigued. The room was still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "Explain," she said, her voice cold but still with that underlying curiosity. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. This was what he had been waiting for, not just in this room, but his entire life. To face the unknown, to face the impossible. To stand before an alien princess and say something that might change everything. "You," he said, each word measured, "are powerful. You can destroy us, enslave us, erase us from existence, but you can't break us." There was a pause. Azira blinked, the first sign of anything other than calm curiosity. The soldiers and courtiers in the room shifted slightly, exchanging uneasy glances, but no one dared interrupt. "Humans don't break," Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. "No matter what you do to us, no matter how many of us you kill, we will fight. We will resist. We will survive. We don't just fight to win, we fight because we have to. That's why you'll never understand why we fear you, because to us, fear is just something we overcome." He let the words hang in the air, letting their weight settle. He didn't need to say more. The silence in the room was louder than any shout. Azira stared at him, her eyes searching his face for some sign of weakness, for some hint that his words were empty. But there was none. Thomas stood there, human and resolute, in the presence of the most powerful being he had ever encountered. For a long moment, Azira said nothing. Her expression was unreadable. She leaned back in her throne, her eyes narrowing, and for the first time since the beginning of their encounter, she seemed thoughtful. The silence stretched, not just in the throne room, but between their worlds, as if the moment was larger than either of them. And then, without another word, Azira simply nodded. Slowly, as if acknowledging something she had just begun to understand. The silence in the throne room stretched out, thick and heavy, as if the words Thomas had spoken still lingered in the air, their weight pressing on everyone present. The princess, Azira, did not speak immediately. She simply studied him, her eyes sharp and calculating, as though she was trying to measure him, to understand him. Her gaze never wavered, and for a moment, Thomas wondered if she even heard him. The tension was unbearable. The courtiers and guards, who had watched the exchange in hushed awe, shifted uneasily in the background. None dared to speak, their eyes flicking nervously between their princess and the human standing before her. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not with such boldness, not with such humanity. Thomas couldn't help but feel the weight of the room upon him. The pressure was like the air before a thunderstorm, thick and charged, but somehow he couldn't move. He wasn't afraid, at least not anymore, but he had never felt so exposed, so raw. His chest felt tight, his pulse a constant thrum in his ears. And yet, despite the fear of the unknown, despite the terror of facing an alien princess who had the power to destroy worlds, he couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't spoken yet. Did she understand? Did she see what he had meant? Did she even care? Finally, Azira broke the silence, though her voice was far softer than before, almost contemplative. "You speak of fear and defiance," she said, her tone calm, but there was a sharpness to it. "But I do not understand. What is it that makes humans so resilient? I have seen your kind fall before. I have seen you die over and over in battle. Yet you rise again, you fight, always, even when defeat seems certain, even when your chances are slim to none." Thomas swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, and he fought to keep his voice steady. He had been a soldier for too long not to know the truth of what she said. He had witnessed it firsthand. He had fought beside men and women who had died on the battlefield, and yet the fight always went on. It never stopped. No matter how many fell, no matter how many lives were lost, humanity pressed forward. It was in their nature. "There's a drive in us," he said slowly, thinking carefully. "A survival instinct, maybe, or something deeper. We don't give up not because we think we'll win, but because we don't know how to stop. Even when we're outmatched, outgunned, we push forward. We don't back down." Azira tilted her head slightly, her silver eyes narrowing. She seemed to be processing his words, but it was clear that this was all new to her. She had encountered many species, many civilizations, but none like humanity. No other species had the same persistence. They might bow to her power, surrender without a fight, or submit to her will. But humans, they refused. They fought even when they knew it was hopeless. It was something Azira couldn't comprehend. She leaned forward slightly, still watching him with that same intense curiosity. "And yet you fear us," she said, her voice quieter this time. "You fear what we could do to you. You fear the power we hold over your planet, your people. Why?" Thomas didn't hesitate this time. The answer was simpler than it had seemed before. "We fear what we don't understand," he said, his voice firm. "We fear what we cannot control." He paused, letting the words settle in the air. "Your power, your abilities are beyond anything we've ever known, and because of that, we fear it. We fear you because you could destroy us in an instant, and we have no way of stopping you. There's no way for us to defend against you, to fight back." Azira's eyes flickered for a moment, as though his words had struck something deeper within her. She had seen humans fight. She had seen them die in wars and conflicts that seemed pointless, that seemed utterly hopeless. But she had never understood what it was that drove them to fight. And now, as she listened to Thomas speak, something inside her began to shift. "You fear the unknown," she murmured, almost to herself. "You fear the very thing that makes us different." Thomas nodded slowly. "Exactly, you have power we can't even begin to understand. You control things we don't even know exist. It's terrifying." Azira sat back in her throne, her gaze still fixed on him. "So, your fear is born not of our strength, but of your inability to comprehend it." "That's part of it," Thomas said, feeling more certain of his words now. "But it's also about what we've lost. What we've had to sacrifice just to survive. We've faced extinction. We've lost billions, but we always rebuild. We always fight on." There was a flicker of something in Azira's eyes then, a glimmer of recognition. She had studied humanity for years, observed their endless wars, their insatiable desire to conquer and to survive. But it wasn't just the wars that defined humanity, it was their resilience. It was their unwillingness to let go of hope, no matter how dark the situation. Azira had always been taught to view other species through the lens of power. Power was everything. The stronger you were, the more control you held over others. That was the way of her people. It was how they ruled the galaxy. But now, standing in front of this human, she saw something different, something that wasn't about power at all, something that she couldn't quite grasp but was beginning to recognize. "And yet," she said after a long pause, "you are so small, so fragile. Your bodies can be broken with a single strike. Your technology is nothing compared to ours, and yet, you do not break. Why?" Thomas took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "Because we know that no matter how hard we fall, there's always a way to rise again. It's not about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about finding a way to keep going, even when it seems impossible." Azira looked at him, the weight of his words settling in her mind. For the first time, she realized that humanity's true strength wasn't in their technology or their weaponry. It was in their refusal to give up, to let their fear control them. It was in their ability to endure, to survive against all odds. She could understand power. She could understand domination, but this was different. It was something she hadn't seen before. For the first time in her life, Azira wasn't sure what to make of the human standing before her. She wasn't sure what to make of his fear or his defiance or his strength. There was something in him that was more than just survival. It was something that no amount of power could destroy. "I see," she said softly, almost as if to herself, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The air in the room seemed to shift, as though a new understanding had been born, one that neither of them could fully comprehend yet. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but reflective. Azira studied Thomas with new eyes, and he, in turn, couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had changed. Something fundamental. In the end, neither of them had the answers they were looking for. But for the first time, both of them had come to a realization. Fear wasn't always about power. Sometimes, fear was about something much deeper, something that couldn't be easily understood. And for that, neither of them was prepared. Thomas could feel the weight of Azira's gaze long after her words had faded. She had fallen silent, but he could sense that she was not merely observing him anymore. There was something different in her presence now, an intensity that went beyond mere curiosity. The princess, who had once seemed so untouchable, was now someone whose thoughts were harder to predict. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the throne room felt heavy, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Thomas tried to steady his breathing, his mind racing. He had been in countless battles, faced enemies who were far stronger, more vicious than any human he had ever encountered. But none of them had ever made him feel quite like this, small, vulnerable, and exposed. The power of Azira of her people was overwhelming. He had seen it firsthand. Her very presence seemed to bend the rules of the universe, and yet, she was intrigued. She was questioning. She was not simply content to destroy. That was the real danger. If she chose to understand humanity, if she chose to adapt her thinking, there was no telling what could happen. Azira shifted in her seat, the fabric of her gown moving with an ethereal grace. Her silver eyes never left Thomas as she leaned forward, her voice soft but filled with something new. "You say you fear what you do not understand," she began, her tone thoughtful. "But do you understand me, human?" Thomas swallowed. He didn't know what to say to that. He couldn't. How could anyone understand a being like Azira? She was a princess of an empire that spanned galaxies, a race that had mastered science and power in ways humans could only dream of. She was more than just an individual. She was a symbol of everything humanity had struggled against, everything they had lost. How could he understand her? But as he looked at her, something in her expression made him think that she wasn't asking because she expected an answer. She was searching for one herself, though she might not have realized it yet. "No," he said finally, his voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. "I don't understand you, not completely." Azira regarded him in silence, then nodded slightly. "I see," she said, almost to herself. "Then you are like the others. You only see us through the lens of your fear." Thomas frowned. He had expected her to be angry or offended, but instead there was only a quiet understanding in her voice. She wasn't mocking him, but it wasn't an acceptance either. It was as if she had come to a realization, one that he didn't fully comprehend. She was still Azira, the princess of a terrifyingly powerful empire. But now, for the first time, he was seeing a glimpse of something else. Something that made her feel a little more human. "I don't fear you because of who you are," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I fear what you can do, what your people can do. I fear what you could do to us if you chose to." Azira's eyes flickered at that, her face unreadable. For a moment, she seemed to weigh his words, letting them linger in the air. And then she spoke again, but this time her words were more pointed, more dangerous. "You speak of fear, but you do not know the true meaning of it," she said slowly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You know fear of the unknown, of losing control, but I know fear of being weak, of being vulnerable, of not being in control. That is the true fear I face every day. Do you understand that, human?" Thomas blinked. He had never thought of it that way. Azira, the most powerful being he had ever met, was afraid. He could hardly believe it. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized there was something raw and unguarded in her gaze. For all her power, for all her authority, she was afraid too. "I don't think I do," he said, his voice quieter now. "But maybe I'm starting to understand a little more." Azira didn't respond right away. She simply stared at him as though seeing him for the first time. And in that moment, Thomas realized that she had been trying to understand him too. The princess who had once seemed so far beyond him, so unapproachable, was now someone who was grappling with her own fears. She had been studying him, yes, but in doing so, she had allowed herself to become vulnerable as well. "What if I were to offer you something?" Azira asked, suddenly breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, something that made Thomas tense. "What if I could show you the power we possess, the power we could offer you?" Thomas frowned. He had heard whispers of what Azira's people were capable of the technology they wielded and the armies they commanded. But it wasn't just power that had drawn him to Earth's fight for survival. It was the will to fight back, the refusal to bow down. He wasn't sure if he wanted to accept anything from someone like Azira, even if it could save humanity. "Power?" he asked, his voice careful. "What kind of power?" Azira's smile was almost imperceptible, a slight curve at the corners of her lips. "The kind that could end the war. The kind that could end the fear." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Thomas felt the full weight of what she was offering. She wasn't just speaking about an alliance or some temporary reprieve. She was speaking about the potential to change everything, to erase humanity's fear once and for all. It was tempting. He knew it was. The war had cost humanity so much already, lives, cities, resources. But what would be the cost of accepting this kind of power? What would it mean for humanity's future if they allowed themselves to be indebted to Azira's people? "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with suspicion. "Why offer us this power?" Azira's eyes narrowed slightly. Because I see something in you, human, she said softly. Something I do not see in my own people. I see strength in you, a strength that does not come from power but from survival, from the will to keep fighting no matter the odds. It is something I admire. Thomas was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. He couldn't tell if she was playing a game or if she genuinely meant what she said. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at stake here, something far bigger than either of them realized. And yet, as he stood there, in the presence of the most powerful being in the galaxy, he felt a strange sense of resolve building inside him. He wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but he knew that no matter what happened, humanity could not afford to back down. "We'll fight," he said finally, his voice clear and unwavering. "We'll fight whether we have your power or not. That's who we are. We don't need your power to survive. We'll find our own way, just like we always do." Azira looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she didn't speak, and neither did Thomas. But in the silence, something unspoken passed between them. They were no longer enemies, not in the way they had been when the meeting began. They were something else, two beings different in every way yet connected by something deeper, a shared understanding, however small. "I admire your resolve," Azira said finally, her voice softer than it had been before. "And perhaps there is more to you than I thought." The tension in the room seemed to shift, to relax. Azira's eyes softened just a little. And for the first time since the conversation had begun, Thomas felt a flicker of hope, however small, that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward that didn't involve destruction. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path where both humanity and Azira's people could walk side by side. But that, he knew, was a thought for another time. For now, the only thing that mattered was that they had found a small sliver of common ground, and that was enough. The throne room felt different now. The air that had once seemed thick and oppressive was lighter, but the tension between Thomas and Azira remained, like the calm before a storm. The princess had been silent for what felt like an eternity, her gaze never leaving him. It was as if she were still trying to understand him, to understand what made humanity so different from the other species she had encountered. Thomas had expected her to be angry or perhaps dismissive of his refusal to accept her offer. But instead there was something else in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't pity. It wasn't contempt. It was curiosity. She stood up slowly, her movements fluid, graceful. Her silver eyes never wavered, and for the first time, Thomas realized that Azira wasn't just the ruler of an empire. She was something more. She was a force of nature, a being whose power transcended the physical. She was both a symbol of immense strength and a paradox, a being capable of annihilation yet seeking understanding. "I have offered you power," Azira said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "A power that could end your war, end your suffering. Why do you refuse it?" Thomas stood tall, his back straight, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the answer, had known it from the moment she had first spoken of power. Power wasn't the answer. Survival wasn't about power, it was about something deeper. It was about the will to keep going, no matter what. "We refuse because we cannot afford to lose what makes us human," he said firmly. "We can't give up our independence, our choice. We may not have the strength that you do, but we have something you can't take away." Azira's eyes narrowed slightly, and she took a step closer to him, her presence undeniable. "You speak of independence, but what is it that you fight for? What is it that you have left?" Thomas swallowed, his thoughts racing. What was it that humans fought for? He had seen so many battles, so much destruction. He had seen families torn apart, cities reduced to rubble, worlds consumed by war. But still, humanity fought. They always fought, and they always rebuilt. "We fight for each other," Thomas said, his voice steady, but filled with something stronger than conviction. "We fight because we are a part of something bigger than ourselves. We fight because, in the end, it's the only thing we know how to do." Azira stood before him, her expression unreadable. She had been studying humanity for so long, but there was still so much she didn't understand. She had seen civilizations fall before, watched as species crumbled under the weight of their own weakness. She had seen them beg for mercy, surrender to her people's might. But humans, they were different. They didn't beg, they didn't surrender, they fought. And even when they lost, they rose again. "You speak of fighting, but fighting alone does not guarantee victory," Azira said softly, her voice tinged with something like sorrow. "Fighting alone only leads to destruction. I have seen it in your species. The wars, the suffering." All because you refuse to see that there is another way. Thomas shook his head slowly. It's not about victory, Princess. It's about survival. It's about holding on to what makes us who we are. We fight because we believe we can make a difference. We fight because we have to. Azira's gaze softened for a moment, and for the first time since they had met, Thomas saw something like understanding in her eyes. She had seen the destruction, the chaos that humanity had brought upon itself. She had watched as entire populations were wiped out, as worlds were ravaged by the endless cycle of war. And yet, even in the face of all that, humanity refused to bow down. They refused to give up. I don't understand it, Azira said, her voice barely above a whisper. How can you endure so much pain and still keep fighting? Thomas didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. He knew that no words could truly explain it. It wasn't something that could be understood by logic or reason. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about the fight itself, about never giving up no matter how hopeless it seemed. I don't know, he said finally, his voice low but steady. I don't know how we do it. Maybe it's just in us. Maybe it's something we can't explain, but we do it because we have to. Because if we don't, then what do we have left? Azira's expression was still unreadable, but there was something in the way she looked at him now that was different. There was no longer disdain or detachment in her gaze. There was respect. And maybe, just maybe, a flicker of admiration. You humans, Azira murmured more to herself than to him. You have a strength I never thought possible, a strength I never understood. Thomas didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew that this was a turning point, a moment where things might never be the same. Azira, the princess who had once seemed so far beyond him, was beginning to see humanity in a new light. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about something deeper. Something that couldn't be measured in terms of strength or might. It was about the will to survive. Azira turned away from him, her back to him for a moment as she walked toward the grand windows of the throne room. The view outside was breathtaking, vast, endless expanses of stars and planets stretching out into infinity. It was a reminder of the immense power her people possessed, of the empire that spanned galaxies. But even as she looked out into the vastness of space, she seemed lost in thought. I have seen empires rise and fall, she said quietly, her voice distant. I have seen civilizations crumble under their own arrogance. I have seen the strong destroy the weak, and I have watched as they fell to nothing. Thomas didn't move. He simply watched her, waiting for her to continue. But you humans, Azira continued, her voice soft but filled with something new. You fight because you don't know how to stop. You fight because it's who you are. And maybe, just maybe, that's why I can't help but wonder. What would happen if we didn't destroy you? Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. He wasn't sure what she meant by that. Was it a challenge, a threat, or was it something else, something he didn't yet understand? Azira turned to face him once more, her silver eyes meeting his with an intensity that took his breath away. I've seen your kind fight, and I've seen what happens when you lose. But what I haven't seen is what happens when you win. If you truly believe that you can survive this war, then show me. Show me that you are worth saving. Her words hung in the air, a challenge, a test. And for the first time, Thomas understood what it was she wanted from him. She wasn't just offering power. She wasn't just asking for surrender. She was asking for humanity to prove that they could endure, to prove that they could overcome the odds and rise from the ashes of their destruction. She was asking for humanity to show her something that no one else had ever been able to demonstrate, the true strength to survive. Then we will show you, Thomas said, his voice firm, his resolve clear. We will fight, and we will survive, because that's what we do. And we will never stop. Azira studied him for a long moment, and in her eyes, Thomas saw something change. It wasn't just respect anymore, it was something deeper. Something that, for the first time, made him feel that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for humanity to survive this war after all. The tension in the throne room was almost unbearable now. Azira stood by the grand windows, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of stars and planets beyond, while Thomas remained where he stood, his mind racing. Her words had struck deep, more than he had expected. She wasn't just offering power or dominion over humanity. She was asking them to prove that they were worth saving. She was asking them to show their strength, to show that they could rise above the ashes of war and stand tall. For a moment, everything felt still. The air seemed thick with the weight of what was about to come, a momentous choice that would shape the future of humanity and her empire. Azira's silver eyes flicked to him once more, her expression unreadable, but something had shifted in her gaze. There was no longer the sharp, calculating look of a conqueror. Now there was something else, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even doubt. Thomas didn't know if he had the answer she wanted. He didn't know if humanity could survive the trial she had set before them. But one thing was clear, humanity would not bow down, not to Azira, not to anyone. "We will survive," Thomas said again, his voice unwavering, though the weight of his words felt heavier now. "We will fight, and we will show you that we are worth saving." Azira studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though trying to see through him to measure the depth of his resolve. Thomas stood firm, refusing to show any sign of doubt. The war had cost humanity so much already, but it had also forged something stronger than steel in the hearts of men and women, the will to endure, to keep fighting no matter the odds. Azira took a step forward, her presence commanding. "Very well," she said, her voice quiet but filled with an unmistakable authority. "You have made your choice, but be warned, human, this path will not be easy. You will face trials that will test everything you hold dear. And when you stand at the edge of despair, you will have to decide whether you can truly rise again." Thomas met her gaze, his heart steady. "We will." Azira looked at him for another moment, her eyes searching. Then slowly she nodded, almost imperceptibly, and turned her back to him once more. The silence that followed felt like a veil being lifted from the room. The tension was still there, but something had changed. There was a new understanding between them now, one that neither could quite explain but both could feel. "You have answered my question," Azira said, her voice distant now, as though speaking more to herself than to him. "I asked why you feared me, but now I see that what you fear is not me. It is not our power. It is the very thing that makes you human, your capacity to endure, your refusal to bow, your ability to keep fighting no matter how much you lose." Thomas felt a strange mixture of pride and unease at her words. He wasn't sure if she truly understood or if she simply saw humanity as a challenge to be conquered. But he knew one thing, she was right. What made humans unique was not their strength, but their will. Their refusal to give up no matter the cost. "I think," Azira continued, her voice softer now, "that I have underestimated you, human. I thought I understood your kind, but now, I wonder if there is more to you than I have seen." Thomas remained silent. He didn't know how to respond. Words felt inadequate now. He wasn't sure what kind of future lay ahead for humanity, but he knew one thing, they would face it with everything they had. They would fight. They would survive. They would prove that they were worthy of survival, no matter the cost. Azira turned back toward the windows, her eyes distant as she gazed out at the stars. "The path ahead will not be easy," she said again, her tone thoughtful, "but perhaps it is one worth walking." There was a long pause, and then she spoke once more. "I will allow you to remain on this world, human. I will not interfere in your fight, but know this, you will not be alone. I will watch. And when the time comes, when you need to make your stand, you will know where to find me." Thomas felt a sense of relief wash over him. He wasn't sure what this meant, whether it was an offer of alliance or something more dangerous. But for the first time since entering the throne room, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, humanity had a chance. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "We won't forget this." Azira's silver eyes flicked to him, and for a moment he saw something almost human in her gaze, something fleeting, like a shadow of a thought that she wasn't ready to acknowledge. Then just as quickly her expression hardened, and she turned away from him once more, looking out at the endless expanse of space. "You may go now," she said, her voice cold once more. "The war is not over, and there is much work to be done." Thomas nodded, feeling a strange sense of finality in her words. He had come to this room seeking answers, seeking a way to survive, and now he was leaving with something far more important, a chance. A chance for humanity to prove that they could rise above the ashes of war, above the fear that had once threatened to consume them. As he turned to leave the throne room, he glanced back at Azira. Her figure stood tall, bathed in the light of distant stars, her back to him as she watched the galaxies unfold before her. He wasn't sure if she had truly changed her mind about humanity, or if she had simply made a pragmatic decision. But for now, it didn't matter. What mattered was that humanity had one more chance to prove that they could survive, that they could endure, and that they could rise again. As Thomas exited the throne room and walked down the long corridor, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The war was far from over. The challenges ahead would be greater than anything humanity had ever faced. But for the first time in a long time, he felt that they could face it. He didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was certain: humanity would not give up. They would fight, they would endure, and they would survive.